I'm going to wrap it up by saying, and quoting Denzel Washington, at the end of the day, it's not what you have or even what you've accomplished. It's about what you've done with those accomplishments. I can see there's a lot of buzz in the room. So I'll just wait for everybody to settle in. Yes. All right, then. I think we've had enough thought-provoking ideas, so I'm going to just say that again. And I'm quoting Denzel Washington. At the end of the day, it's not about what you have or even what you've accomplished. It's about what you've done with those accomplishments. It's about who you've lifted up, who you've made better. It's about what you've given back. So I think the message was loud and clear for us to start thinking about and taking great pride in India and what it has to offer. So on that note, I'm going to be switching scenes from social impact to the global stage of geopolitics. We are at a perplexing cusp where the old world is dying and a new world is struggling to be born. The next panel discussion, ladies and gentlemen, is Iran war and its impact. Let's welcome to the stage the panelists, and I'll start by welcoming Mr. Rudra Chaudhuri, Vice President, Innovation Ecosystem. His research and policy work focuses on the important role of technology, innovation in diplomacy, statecraft, development, and business. He has, through his books, focused on how India navigates sovereignty, security, and strategic decision-making in a complex international environment, balancing principles with pragmatic responses to conflict and global power dynamics. An erstwhile director of Carnegie India, associate professor at the Department of War Studies at King's College London, founding director of UK Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office's Diplomatic Academy for South Asia at King's College London. So I'd like to welcome you on the stage, Mr. Chaudhuri. Thank you. Our next panelist is Mr. Akshay Mathur, Senior Director, Asia Society Policy Institute, a global non-profit organization dedicated to understanding Asia through policy, arts, and education. He is responsible for the Institute's policy mandate in India. His area of expertise is geoeconomics, specifically international financial architecture, global trading system, global economic governance, and global digital governance. A non-resident senior fellow with the Digital Economy Program at the Center for International Governance Innovation, CIGI, Canada. He has actively contributed at several Indian and global forums on international, domestic, and local policy making. So welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. Next, I'd like to invite on stage Dr. Constantino Xavier. Dr. Xavier, Senior Fellow at the Center of Social and Economic Progress, a prominent Indian public policy think tank where he directs the program in Foreign Policy and Security Studies, a non-resident fellow in the Foreign Policy Program at Brookings Institution, Washington, D.C., a visiting professor at Ashoka University's Department of International Relations. His research expertise has had a wide impact with governments, industry, and other stakeholders invested in enhancing India's geoeconomics integration with neighboring countries and regions. Dr. Xavier specializes in national security interests and growing economic interdependence. He has published academic books and journals on India's foreign and security policies. A distinguished alumnus, awardee of Indian Council of Cultural Relations, Ministry of External Affairs. Our panelists, who clearly are in conversation already, so thank you so much for the enthusiasm, will be in conversation with Vice Admiral Anil Chopra, former Navy Commander-in-Chief of Western and Eastern Naval Commands and commentator on military and strategic affairs. He was the chief of the Indian Coast Guard immediately after the 2008 Mumbai attacks. His seagoing commands include the Western Fleet, the Navy's principal strike formation, the aircraft carrier INS Virat, and missile destroyer INS Rajput. He has served on the National Security Advisory Board and the Apex Defense Acquisition Council. Over to you, Admiral.
They give you one night stay.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I think it's time to go to war. You know, the nature of war is perennial. It's brutal, it's vicious, it's violent. There is no glory in it, except in Hollywood and Bollywood. You can only experience the nature of war by actually going to the battlefields. On the other hand, the character of war keeps changing and is determined by the economics, the technology, and the geopolitics of the times. That you can experience here indoors, and that's what we are going to talk about in this panel. For most of us, the Iran war has been basically entertainment, quasi-entertainment, a reality show, all engineered by narratives, propaganda, conspiracy theories that all of us are exposed to daily. And of course, the opinions of a million strategic experts that everyone seems to have become. It is difficult indeed, even for informed audiences such as this, to separate fact from fiction. The entertainment is, of course, now giving way to concern and apprehension as the economic and geopolitical impacts of the war become only too evident. We are currently 2 months into the conflict that is clearly having a global impact in a manner that Ukraine and Gaza did not, and may be permanently rewriting the rules of the 21st century. The conventional military power of Iran has been very significantly eroded, but it still retains sporadic capability to interdict commercial shipping in the Straits of Hormuz. On the other hand, the US blockade of Iranian ports is causing it severe deprivation and huge problems in regard to the storage of oil that it is producing. Whether the ceasefire will hold is anybody's guess, and we are not in the business of speculation. But the lack of internet, the electricity, the basic needs in the populace is sooner or later going to explode, whether the war comes to an end or whether it withers down in time. And the already fractured leadership in Iran will have to contend with a fair amount of civil unrest. As you can imagine, our panel has a very limited time to address a very wide canvas, but they're all experts in their field. I have a very high regard for them, and I'm sure they'll be able to convey in the time given. They will illuminate the proceedings. Our first speaker, Akshay Mathur, in the center, will address the geo-economic fallout. For years, we have spoken of de-risking and energy transition as abstract goals, Today, they are survival strategies, especially for India. With the Straits of Hormuz facing a double blockade, as it were, and Iranian strikes hitting critical gas facilities in Qatar, we are seeing global GDP forecasts being slashed all around. $150 oil is no longer just a price point. It promises to be a brutal test of resilience for European and Asian markets that are already on edge. Our second speaker, Constantino Xavier, will take us through the geopolitical arena. This war has already shattered the old Middle Eastern status quo. We are seeing a historical realignment. The Gulf states are navigating the impossible tightrope between US security guarantees and the reality of the Iranian asymmetric reach. The conflict has also shifted diplomatic oxygen away from Ukraine and the hotspots of the Indo-Pacific and the world. We're witnessing a birth of a more fragmented world in which the declining influence of multilateral institutions like the United Nations, and indeed the whole concept of international law, may see the globe return to an era of competitive nationalism through the currency of hard power. Finally, our third speaker will dive into the technology aspects. If the 20th century was defined by industrial level warfare, the 21st will be remembered for AI integrated autonomous killing machines. We have seen the first large scale use of systems like Palantir's Maven, which rapidly detect, identify, prioritize, and then attack thousands of targets simultaneously, and have compressed the kill chain from days to seconds. There is just not enough time for me to elaborate on military matters, which is the fourth dimension, in any meaningful way. Suffice to say that the battle space is now almost totally transparent. The weapons are autonomous, long range, hypersonic, and precise, and the war is being fought as expected in multi-domain across land, sea, air, cyber, and space. Perhaps the most significant lesson from the war has been the question of prolonged sustainability of modern air defense. The quick and cheap availability of lethal drones, as you've all seen, has underlined the absolute criticality of robust and effective air defense networks for all nations. Let me end by touching on the maritime dimension, about which there is much ignorance. The uproar of over the sinking of the Iranian warship by a US submarine of Sri Lanka and the questions pertaining to the outgoing blockades of Hormuz are indicative of confusion and misunderstanding. Let me just say, there is no sovereignty at sea. There are no borders. The maritime commons belong to no nation, no grouping, no commercial entity. There are no laid down areas of influence or backyards in maritime international law. There are no roads, there are no terrains, there are no fences. It's a different world. Anything that you do has to be enforced by naval power. A blockade is an act of war, as undertaken by India, for those of us who remember, against East Pakistan in 1971. The freedom of the seas for trade and transportation also translates into the freedom of the seas for hostilities. When two belligerents go to war on land, all the oceans of the world become an arena of combat for their navies. Belligerents had full liberty to attack each other anywhere on the world's oceans. That is the harsh maritime reality and the legal position. With that, let us get underway. Geoeconomics, geopolitics, geotechnology, 3 lenses, 1 hour, and a conflict that is redefining our future. Please join me in welcoming our first speaker.
Thank you. Good morning. Can you hear me at the back? Great. I had a different start, but Punita really egged me on by starting the session by saying maybe if we combine the wealth in this room, we can, maybe even get another country going. So I looked up the total revenue of the Oberoi Group, and it turns out that there are only 3 actually countries which are below in GDP. And that would be 3 Pacific Island states, actually. Tuvalu, Nuaru, and Kiribati. I know, but if you actually combine the wealth of the alumni here, you might have actually something going. So, conferences are supposed to be so boring. But if you ever, if this ends up resulting in another country, I think you would have really set a precedent. But this is why I love geoeconomics so much, because you can start ideating. And of course, this particular conflict has caught our attention and captivated us for the last few weeks. There are so many countries that are in play. You have US, Israel, Iran, of course, the 3 major players. You have Lebanon, and you have Syria, which has also been involved militarily. You have the 6 GCC countries, which you're all familiar with: Gulf countries, Bahrain, Oman, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Kuwait. You also have countries overtly and covertly that are participating. You have China, Japan. And so the region is really important. And of course, every day in the papers, we are hearing about different commodities, that are currently held up. Energy, crude oil, and LNG. You have agriculture, ammonia, urea. You have jet fuel. There's chemicals, sulfur, and so on. There's critical minerals, aluminium, helium, which is used in technology industry. And the numbers are quite staggering, of how much really goes through these straits. And all of us have had to do a little bit of a crash course in really trying to understand how much goes through this little narrow straits of Hormuz. 25% of LNG, 33% of global fertilizer, 50% of global seaborne sulfur, 33% of global helium. These are huge numbers. And recall that on February 27, before all this started, about 100 and 150 ships used to go through this particular strait every day. On March 3, that number was 0. And out of those 120 ships a day, 40, 50 were tankers. The number is 0. So the criticality of this particular narrow stretch cannot be overemphasized. But it also sort of helps for us to take a slightly more disaggregated view of the Gulf. Now, I don't think there's any Oberoi property in the Gulf, is there? I think there's Egypt and Morocco, but it wasn't on your website. I think that's the last time I checked. But, the 6 Gulf countries have a total GDP of 2.5 trillion. That's roughly about half, a little bit more than half of India's GDP. This is all of the 6 Gulf countries combined. The contribution to global GDP is 2%. 2% of global GDP only. And look at the asymmetric impact that has on the world economy. Now, Saudi Arabia, of course, is the largest economy. But gradually, through the course of this war, their financial vulnerabilities are also becoming more obvious. I mean, I don't know how many people track Saudi Arabia here, but for 10 years now, they've been running fiscal deficits. I mean, they have sovereign wealth funds, but Saudi Arabia has been running a fiscal deficit for a long time. UAE and Qatar are doing okay. Oman barely doing better. And Bahrain, chronic economic deficit. So we should not, when we think of the Gulf, we should not club them all together. They are also under fiscal stress. And you can imagine this has led to 2 recent developments. One, you've all read in the papers that UAE has decided to pull out of OPEC. Because, of course, getting more production in the market and so on gets them more revenue, helps them, UAE, retain its power as a global financial center. But also, the UAE has asked the United States for a dollar swap line. Really, really important. For a region that actually prides itself in the kind of capital it has to deploy around the world, but still feel the economic pressure of this growing is quite remarkable. Now, the implications are there for the rest of the world too. The US, the gas prices have gone back past $4 a gallon. This is for those who have been associated with the US, you can imagine is really important. When they see $4 a gallon at the gas stations, it's something shifts for the Americans, you know. But this is the first time it's gone back up since the Russia-Ukraine war. And what we are now seeing is that the Americans might feel a little bit of pressure if the gas continues to be above $4. China, of course, is playing a very important silent role. I would have liked Admiral Chopra and others to also to fill in. But I was, first when this news broke out of this conflict, that I was surprised to see that 80 to 90% of Iran's oil is going to China. Imagine the kind of economic and energy partnership the two countries have. And Iran has been sanctioned, but China has been able to pay because China has set up a bilateral payment mechanism. We can get into that if that's of interest, but it is important from a geoeconomic perspective because it helps China and Iran avoid and bypass the sanctions. What has also been remarkable is that China, along with Japan and Korea, have built up so much reserve that they're able to withstand at least the economic implications far longer than possibly we can here in India. The petroleum reserves for Japan and Korea, Japan, 250 days. Korea, 200 days. China, 100 plus days. Right? For us, it was 7 days. But what you would hear in the news is that when you combine all the oil together, that's the oil that is currently with our oil marketing companies, that's on the ships. The number that was set out on February 28 was 75 days worth of oil. Of course, since then, tankers have also come in. But we are near about completing that 75 days. And because of the additional crude that we are getting, we'll get a little bit more leeway. But it's coming to a head even for India. So it's really important. Pakistan, of course, in our neighborhood has found an interesting role for itself. But it's quite amazing. I mean, it's a country which is under a $7.5 billion loan and has severe food and petrol shortages. Barely has like $15 billion worth of foreign exchange reserves. I mean, even our reserves, I mean, we are also a little insecure, but we have $700 billion. But at $15 billion, Pakistan is still able to, somehow at least diplomatically project that it has a role to play. And then, of course, we can get into the impact on other Asian countries. But let me just come to Iran before I come to India. This country has been sanctioned for the last 50 years. Iran. The total GDP of Iran is like $300 billion or so. I mean, the GDP of Maharashtra is $500 billion. The GDP of Karnataka, Gujarat, Tamil Nadu is the same as that of Iran. Iran has been a country which has been sanctioned for 50 years. It is a country which has seen targeted assassination of its leadership. I mean, top 50 leaders, and we're talking generals, not even foot soldiers, have seen their leadership being wiped out. And somehow it is being able to not just withstand, but let's say almost being able to checkmate a global superpower. So I think it just goes to show the role that geoeconomics plays. Perhaps it's coming to a head for Iran too. They're not showing it, but of course, it'll show if they really start succumbing to the requests that are coming from the White House and if they come back to the negotiating table. But for us, it's very important to make these distinctions about what's happening in the Gulf, the Iranian GDP, the world GDP, because it's important for us to situate ourselves in this global economy. So, of course, Indian government has had a variety of responses. They have redirected the oil companies to focus more towards retail consumption. They've managed to actually diversify their sources of oil. They've gone from 27 sources of oil to 40 plus now. 70% apparently of our crude oil and energy requirements are now coming outside of the Straits of Hormuz. These are all great decisions. There's been relief that has been given to exporters and micro enterprises and so on. Reserve Bank of India has taken several steps. curbing the rupee speculation that goes on outside of our borders in the non-deliverable forwards market and so on. But of course, with a country like India, which has 90% of its crude oil needs that are being imported, and 50% which was coming through Hormuz, it'll not be that easy to diversify. It'll take time. On top of it, India's imports were 50% of its imports, of LNG imports, were from Qatar. And as Admiral Chopra mentioned, the bombing of the Qatar facility is not likely to come back soon. I mean, I believe the estimates are 5 to 10 years. So, of course, there's going to be other sources of LNG that we would have to now secure. A couple of other commodities and chemicals, which I think get left out of the domain, but I think it's important for India to consider, right? Copper for us, aluminium, these are really important, up 30% in prices. There's all kinds of, we need fertilizer too. The fertilizer, I believe we have enough for this Kharif season, the plantation that happens in monsoon, but the plantation that happens in December, January for Rabi, that's in serious threat. So, of course, it's in our interest now. These are all points I'm trying to make, that I think everything is coming to a head and we'll have to make certain decisions quite soon, and hoping that the war can come to an end, or at least the blockade can come to an end so that we can get our commodities and our inputs. One important point in all of this commodity import business is that for many of these imports that are currently stuck, the alternative is actually the United States. And I was trying to look up the chemicals for which this is true. Diammonium phosphate, actually, we're getting from Saudi Arabia, but we'll have to go to China. Ammonia, we're getting from Saudi Arabia, but we'll have to go to Canada. Again, petrochemicals, Saudi Arabia, but we'll have to go to the United States. Ethylene glycol, United States. Fertilizer, United States. So we're coming on the back of this really stressful time with the United States last year with the trade agreement and so on. And imagine that our dependence and our economic dependence, our interdependence with the United States is actually set to grow, particularly in these critical sectors. Now, let me end by just talking a little bit about our finances. We have the rupees, of course, I see that I have 2 minutes left. The rupees, of course, taken a bit of a beating, and the foreign institutional investors have pulled out a lot of capital. So we need foreign capital. And between what Mr. Ashish Dhawan said, whether it's tourism or any other sector, anything at this point is going to be very important for us to plug the gap. So fundamentally for us, and this will be my final point, is that foreign capital is going to continue to be very, very important. FDI last year, $80 billion gross FDI, but net FDI was flat. Remittances for us, really critical. We get 40% of our remittances from the Gulf, which is about to take a beating. So the total remittances for India annually is about $130 billion. $130 billion remittances, FDI, net FDI, zero. So the remittances is actually very important. And I think we need to find a way that our diaspora in the Gulf can continue to sustain themselves. So with that, I see that I've crossed about my time limit. So we're in the Q&A, but happy to talk a little bit more about how we can secure more capital from the Gulf and what's happening in trade. But hopefully that gives at least some kind of an idea on geoeconomic imperatives for the region. So I'll stop here.
Thank you, Akshay.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon already. Thank you, Vice Admiral Chopra, Anil, for the invitation. Wonderful to be here. And you and Ragini make a real wonderful power couple. Good to see you collaborate on this and bring in more people into the room. Listen, I'll talk about geopolitics, but I just want to say one word, a hat tip to all of you. I was thinking, what can I say about the Oberoi Group? That is nice about you. And I went through the 10 editions you've had of the Global Hospitality Conclave with the great speakers. That's all very well, but I thought of the real thing that comes to my mind when I think about Oberoi, which is when I go back to my old father's homeland, Goa, where my father is originally from, I meet young people across society in Goa. These can be very wealthy kids from Goa's top families. These can be kids whose parents were farmers sometimes and live in the villages of South Goa, where we're originally from. And many of them I've met who have worked with the Oberoi Group. Many of them have been trained, I believe, in this school here, your leadership school and training school. And all of them, as all of you, I think, who are product of this industry, say that it's a very tough industry to be in. And I always learn about how tough it is and how good I have it when I'm just reading and teaching and writing, which is much easier than dealing with different people and personalities and making them feel welcome at your various hotels. But they also all say that they loved working for the Oberoi Group. And I think, and you feel these things. We know this in life. You meet people and they speak about a former company, a former place they worked at, and you can feel in the tone of their voice whether they liked it or not. I have to say that among the many young people in Goa I've met, at least, it's always with a very warmth and nostalgia that those who have at least moved on to others speak of the Oberoi Group. Listen, I want to just quickly connect hospitality to geopolitics. That's going to be a tough one. But I think one thing we can all agree is that every rising power, every country that has grown economically, politically, militarily, in societal ways, had one principle, which was a principle of openness, of hospitality to foreign capital, hospitality to foreign ideas and technologies, hospitality to foreign people and individuals who moved to this country and grew together with that country. 25 years ago, I can't believe it sounds like a quarter of a century ago, I left my hometown of Lisbon, Portugal, because I wanted to get to know India and the country my father had been originally from. People said I was crazy. My professors told me I would never be able to come back to Europe. My degrees would not be recognized from Indian universities. This was a third world country. I somehow took that plunge, and I have to say that I can confirm that India is an extremely hospitable and open country, and I'm proud to have grown with India over the last 25 years. And therefore, I think India is on a growth trajectory precisely because of these small examples of openness and hospitality. It's a country that is growing together with its neighborhood and region. It's a country that is going together with Asia and with the rest of the world. And I think if it continues on that track, it will certainly become another top power in the world economy and in world politics. What I'll do a bit more concretely about the geopolitics and what Anil, you've asked us to sort of push through thinking what's happening around us in this weird world we're living in now, is to think through three basic forces, I think, that are underlying what we often say, mention when we speak about big words like geopolitical transition, geopolitical order, rising powers, declining powers. We all hear these big terms and words, but there are three structural forces I want us to look at briefly to understand what's really happening in terms of geopolitical change around the world. And these are forces, sometimes we don't see them very openly or very clearly, but if you look over the last 10, 20 years, I think there's three clear trends that are driving geopolitical change and the distribution of power, capabilities in international order. The first one is we are growing more together, to my first point. It's a very interconnected, interdependent world in terms of trade, technology, finance, even people. Never before has the world been so closely knit together. Now, if you believe economists, and I work at a place with many economists, and there might be many economists in the room, the traditional idea is always that if we trade with each other, right, if we do more commerce and more economic relations with each other, then therefore peace will follow. We'll become closer to each other. The more interconnected we are, the more interdependent we are, then therefore we have a more peaceful relationship with our neighboring countries, for example. That's the story of the European Union, for example, where I grew up. But I would actually posit, and I think I'd like us all to think about the dangers of actually coming closer together. The story is not as simple. It is not about trading with each other and peace will follow. In fact, if you look at history, generally, the more connected you become, conflict begins, because the terms of connectivity are being discussed, negotiated. So we are at a moment where we're going very quickly into growing interdependence around the world in the last 10 years. More of that will follow. And the bad news I bring in that sense, or I think the larger force that we must keep in mind is that by coming together, actually, friction emerges. Friction in terms of trade, terms of sharing technology, terms of agreeing who comes into a country or not. But the more interconnected we are, we should just be careful about the assumption that will lead to peace. I think the greater that interdependence is evolving, the greater the friction will ensue. I think the Gulf War shows this in terms of energy in particular. The second structural force is about culture. I studied in the 2000s in the US under political scientists or a big thinker that you may have known of, Francis Fukuyama, who had this book called The End of History that we all probably heard of. And I was always in his class and I felt a bit uncomfortable about this idea that somehow we're all going to be market economies, democracies, there'll be eventually a global middle class, and therefore there'll be no politics, no friction, no conflict, etc. Here we are 20 years later. I think we're clearly farther away than ever from this idea of end of history. And particularly because as we grow together and become more interconnected, our societies are looking inwards. And there's an identitarian cultural conservatism that is sweeping across the world. There's nothing wrong about that. In fact, again, if you look at history, sometimes the more you are open in terms of economic relations, societies shift towards more cultural conservatism. You see this in Europe, you see this in the US, we see this here in India, we see this in many other countries, Bangladesh, Southeast Asia, where people are connecting more with their history, with their culture, with their religion, with their identity, and therefore looking internally for solutions and compensation almost for the openness of trade and growth, etc. The third force beyond the economic connectivity, the cultural conservatism, is one about political developments. And I think we cannot understand geopolitics without a variety of political systems that are emerging. We see a one-party state governing very successfully the People's Republic of China over the last few decades. So certainly there's no end of history and there's no universalization of democracy there. There's certainly a different model that's emerging. So there's going to be a variety of political models that are emerging that are adding to that friction because different countries are choosing different political models. And we're certainly not in the world that some imagined to be in the 2000s, that everyone is going to become a beautiful, sane, liberal democracy, as some of the Western democracies, in the same way that the Western democracy developed over the last few decades. So again, economics, culture, and politics are shaping the geopolitics that we're working in. And we should look at these three structural forces in particular to understand also how states are operating, how our governments are deciding, how foreign policy is often becoming a domestic issue, and that is shaping, therefore, leaders' positions. Let me walk you through three great levels of analysis that we must look at to understand geopolitical change around us: the US, China, and India. And let me try to just predict a little bit how these three levels are going to develop over the next few years. I think the Iran war shows that these three levels, three things. It shows a US that has been predictably unpredictable under President Trump. There is a certainty to uncertainty to US foreign policy now that I think we've given up to sort of wait and watch and see if there's going to be a default back to normalcy and predictability. I think that ship has sailed. Across the world, leaders have realized that there's going to be a deeply embedded unpredictability, erratic or not, genius or idiotic. I leave it up to everyone's wish and preferences. But certainly the US is going to become an unpredictable actor to deal with, and it's going to continue to do so. This means that if you look again at powers that have risen in history, great powers, openness to trade, open to new people and ideas, open to new institutions, consensus builders on emerging technologies, for example, or new sources of power, institution builders. If you look at these five factors that have driven rising powers, they're all missing today in the United States of America. None of these hold. So I think, therefore, we must prepare for a US that is going to be very different, We can wait another few years, but any other future president of the United States of America will be fundamentally constrained into this trajectory and will not, I think, default back to the earlier position. So therefore, I think President Trump is probably more of a symptom than a cause of US change in terms of its behavior. And the sooner we realize that, the better. On the other hand, on the second level, China has quietly risen. It has held on to its guns. It has stayed below the radar for decades. Let us not forget that China has suffered several political humiliations over the last 20 to 30 years. They've stuck to their guns, waited out the moment to come out. China has decided to do that. It has developed a variety of initiatives today, whether the Belt and Road Initiative, the Global Civilization Initiative. China even launched recently a new arbitration and mediation initiative to support conflict mediation between different countries and industries around the world. So you see there all the ingredients of a country that is rising, is open to new people, new ideas, shaping solutions to regulate new sources of power, such as technology, and therefore a quiet diplomacy that is driving China into new spheres of decision making. Today, when I speak to Chinese scholars, recently I was in Singapore meeting with many people. Chinese scholars, of course, are very constrained by their government, and you can sense that what they say is often in line with what the party wants us to hear. But today we see China that is actually saying that we are the source of order, predictability, stability. We see China uttering strange words like rule of law, how ironic, but certainly filling that space or wanting to fill it. In fact, signaling to India, why don't you join us in this quest to restabilize order, to develop climate solutions, technology solutions, economic growth solutions for the world. Whether that is just a siren calling, a dangerous siren or not, I leave it up to you. There are different views. I have my own. I think there are fundamental concerns that we must have in India about that call and that lure from China. Finally, coming to India and the third level, which I would say is India and a variety of other very important powers in the world that are also emerging in geoeconomic terms, like Akshay reminded us, sometimes punching above their weight, like you reminded us, Akshay, in terms of the Gulf. I think we should not confuse in India, it's one thing that I've learned studying Indian foreign policy, silence as inaction. India is often chosen to remain silent and often chosen to stay at the margins of developments. That is not manifesting incapability. I think that is often the toughest thing to do. To stay at the sidelines of a mess is not easy. I think we see that mess developing in the Gulf. India has, of course, developed and pursued its own interests there. But broadly speaking, I think we should always look for the volumes with which India's silence speaks, the hard work that is happening in the background, in government, in diplomacy, alignment with industry to pursue India's growth path towards becoming a developed economy by 2047. This means continuity of India working with a variety of other countries beyond the US, also with the US, also with China, as we are seeing over the last few months, but certainly beyond the US and China. This means not an India that is non-aligned or isolated or neutral. This is an India that is developing diverse partnerships in new areas, economic, technology, security, with the European Union. We had a massive trade deal signed in January this year with the European Union that was in the negotiation or in the thinking for more than 20 years, finally happened. We see Prime Minister Modi, I think, visiting several European countries this and next month. We see an India-Africa summit happening this month here in Delhi after 10 years. We see a variety of new trade deals being developed with Australia and New Zealand. We see an economic security dialogue between India and Japan, a trusted, important partner of India. So you see a variety of new partners emerging that create some type, I don't know, block is of course a strong word, but a framework of countries that are worried about the US, that maybe don't trust China completely and are hanging out with each other and developing ties and interdependencies with each other to sort of stabilize the system and give it, if you want, a third way. I see India leading that pack, that group of countries. It is certainly the only country that has both the intent and capability to lead this group of countries to develop, some, if you want to use a trade union metaphor, some bargaining power and some collective action to shape the system and in terms of economic, financial, security, stability. And I'll end by saying that I've not spoken about three other elements that I don't think matter really to this future geopolitical transition. I have not mentioned Russia. I don't see a great future for Russia as a country of technological innovation, of economic weight for the next 20, 30 years. I've not spoken about Pakistan. Anil, I believe you'll ask me about Pakistan, but I think we shouldn't obsess and worry about Pakistan. It's certainly not a a country with system-changing capabilities that has solutions for the many challenges that we see in the future world order. I've also not mentioned the United Nations and several of the acronyms that we've become habituated over the last few decades. I think it's time to rethink about what multilateralism means, what institutions mean, and however much it might pain us or not, the United Nations today is not a source of solutions, for example, to regulate technology, something that is critical to understand the future geopolitical transition. I think that gives you a good opening, Rudy, on tech. Thank you.
Thank you, Chino.
Segue. Do you mind if I just sit here?
Yeah, sure.
Look, it's Saturday, so I'm just going to sit here. I've been asked to speak about tech, the war, drones. I'm going to put all of that aside. If you have questions, happy. But I'm just trying to think of, I literally been taking some back of the envelope thoughts in terms of what might be useful here given the excellent presentations made. So I'm just going to leave you with 5 or 6 disjointed thoughts, right? So one, at a macro level, and this is just building on what Akshay said, but just think about the world you live in, right? We're going to contract global GDP by about 6%, 0.6% over the next 1 year. Fact. From 3% growth of GDP, you're going to look at about 2.4%. You're losing in the Middle East today, roughly in terms of international visitor spending, about $600 million a day, right? Fact. That's happening. We have lost so far because of this war, 1 billion barrels of oil. That has just vanished because either something's been attacked or it's disappeared, but that's 1 billion barrels of oil that is completely gone, right? Iran's going to cost somewhere between $300 billion and $1 trillion to rebuild. And someone's going to rebuild that, right? That money is going to come from the West. Some of that money, it will come from the West. However ironic that might be. In that, if you were talking to friends in San Francisco and otherwise, you would think that the world looks like a pretty dire place. And I'm guessing it does for you guys as well, right? But have you checked the S&P 500 recently? It's up 3% to where it was in February. Have you looked at Euro stocks? Have you looked at our own stock market, right? So there's something interesting going there. Now you can say that that is tech stocks that's essentially bloating the market. That balloon is going to burst at some particular point in time. But there's something interesting going on with global geoeconomics, which is worth thinking about, right? So that's just the kind of big macro. Second, so that's one disjointed thought I'm just going to leave you with, right? Does it affect you? Obviously it does, right? I think between Abu Dhabi, Dubai, Doha, and Bahrain, we're looking at about, pre-February, you had about 550,000 footfall in terms of flights, right? That was per day. That's going to reduce to about 100,000. Just think of the immediate impacts of that. Second disjointed thought I'm going to leave is on the UAE. There's a lot of argument on the UAE, right? Is the Seventh Federation over? The shine is gone. We're going to see some instability over a long period of time, etc., etc. We have an office in Dubai, so we're closely connected to this, the future of the UAE. I'll give you, the only thing about the UAE I'll just say is, UAE started as an economy that was essentially collecting pearls from the sea. That is how the UAE came about. Then Japan wiped them out. Then they discovered oil. Till about 3 months ago, they were going to celebrate the last barrel of oil around 2050, right? That was the commitment that the UAE had to transform their economy. Now that may go -5 years, +5 years, unclear right now. But the only thing I'll just say about the UAE, and some level UAE is symptomatic of the GCC, is don't give up on it. right? This is not an economy that is just going to go flat out because of a war. You're going to see there is a lot of rejuvenation in terms of thinking, in terms of where do we go as an economy. So second, disjointed thought. Third, where does this leave some stuff on energy? And this is what we're seeing, right? Is one hand, you've got, even prior to this war, you've got a US president that says, drill, 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 right? Which has had an impact on climate, sustainability, etc., etc. On the second hand, you've got clearly a massive energy shock, right? But the 2-3 things that's happening with this, which is interesting, is on the energy side, and we're seeing this more in the data center kind of plane, places like in India, in the UAE and otherwise, we're seeing a massive push now towards nuclear. So if I talk to friends of mine in industry who are building SMRs, small modular reactors, in February, their view was that, look, we're looking to put this out at scale in about 5 years from now. You talk to Mitsubishi, Hitachi, Holtec, or any of these companies today, their view is we'll do it in 2 years, right? So yes, energy shock is going to have an impact on all of us. Cylinders today, commercial cylinders, I don't know if you guys are actually paying for it. I'm guessing you are at 3,000 rupees. I don't know if you have some jugaad with the government, but it's expensive, right? But there's something happening, which is, this is leading to some kind of an impact in terms of rethinking about energy in a way that I've not seen it in a long time, right? You're seeing a lot of R&D, you're seeing a lot of innovation, and you're seeing a kind of, a recreation of the way in which we think about renewables. We're seeing it mostly in the data center play, but it will open up to larger energy markets across India and growing markets in themselves. Fourth, disjointed thought, India. Mixed views. Are we essentially screwed because of what's happening right now? Are we not? Have we handled it well? Have we handled it not? I leave it to the pundits to answer that question. But just look at where we are today, right? One, we were already in a pickle with the United States well before this war came about. The bottom essentially fell off in about July, August, or September. That trust is going to take a very long time to repair, if at all, right? What did that essentially do? It essentially pushed us into newer markets with a verve. Tino talked about the FTA with the European Union. That was our way to say is that now let us actively diversify, right? That's a $500 billion market. If all the documents get signed, it'll take 2 to 3 years to begin to see the fruits of that labor. But that is the market that we're looking at, right? And my sense is that is going to open a lot of opportunity for us. And we're going to see it across sectors, right? Even if we hold back on agri, dairy, etc., which is our case, I think rightfully so, in most FTAs, whether it's hospitality, whether it's footfalls, whether it's new businesses, new ventures, new co-development, you're going to see a lot of activity between Europe and India. And $500 billion is not a small amount of money, right? Someone has to activate that. So you're going to look at new opportunities from India into Europe. And Europeans are going to look at India more intently, right? Second, the GCC. My sense is we're actually pretty well placed across the GCC. We're in a place where the Saudis are fighting with the UAE. UAE is unplugged off OPEC. Irony here is that OPEC was created on the back of the 1973 oil shock. You created it to get together, right? Now it's breaking apart because of another shock. But point is, my sense is that our goodwill across the GCC is going to help you all, right? Prime Minister is going to be in UAE, EM was in UAE, NSA was in UAE, and the general sense is on the coattails of India's foreign policy, you're going to have many opportunities across the GCC. Now you have the Oberoi Hotel has some investments in Saudi Arabia. I was talking to friends of mine in hoteling and they were saying, what a shit show. And it's possibly, I'm guessing you're feeling the pain at some level, but my sense is it's temporary, right? The GCC are going to bounce back. The GCC are going to have a return of 400,000, 500,000, 600,000 people footfall across its hubs in itself. And there, I think Indian foreign policy will work for you in many different ways. And that's a careful balancing act I think the government's pulled together. I'm going to throw another ideas, right? So there is clearly a realignment in thinking on China. And that's come because of various factors. Some of it is natural. Some of it is because of the US pressure. Some of it is because Trump may go do something with Xi Jinping in the next summit that they have. Some of it is because of our own needs. We need to grow in terms of manufacturing. That's just a fact, right? Where is that going to come from? There's also clearly thinking in the government of India about how do you deal with China? The days of pre-2020 of do whatever China wants in India are gone. You're going to have a tiered, calibrated system of how we're dealing with China. But I just wonder in your industry if it doesn't actually open some opportunities, as geopolitically risky as it may sound today, right? Because the drift I'm seeing essentially is that we're returning to some kind of a compact that we signed back in 2005. We have problems, let's dislocate those problems from larger economic needs, right? That's how our trade balance grew to our disfavor, right? Then, of course, all the military stuff happened, Doklam, this, that, Galwan, etc., and which threw us completely in a different direction. But I just wonder, I would think of the opportunity of China, right, in a very different way today rather than a write-off when it comes to geopolitics. And let's face it, between 2005 and roughly 2017, our industries were told by government to get into China. Mr. Tata got into China with Jaguar and manufacturing because that was the verve of the time. Our pharmaceuticals were looking at China as an opportunity because we were told that that's what you should do, right? But there's something going on with China which I would just kind of think about very carefully. Last, which builds the fifth disjointed point, is on tech itself. Look, this war couldn't come at a worse time, right? There's no good time for this particular war, but it literally couldn't come at a worse time. Because you have the war, you have all the geopolitical shocks, you have energy, and then you have this big thing called AI, right? And this stuff is now moving faster than we have kind of considered. So the key question, I think, is that how do we generally deal with an AI-driven universe, right? Alongside the energy shocks, alongside about a year and a half, 2 years of GDP contraction, alongside the question of labor displacement, right? And it all sounds quite scary and horrible and all of that, but I'll just give you a couple of ideas sitting in India. My general sense is that where we are in India is not a bad place when it comes to AI. And taking all these other kind of macro impacts into mind. And the reason is, we're not putting $1 trillion, which we don't have anyway, or $100 billion into some trillion parameter model, right? Or frontier model. I think the general approach has been frugal AI. Is think about how AI can actually change the lives of people. If you can, and that's the Prime Minister's view, right? Which is AI for impact, AI for people. You get AI to every single individual. You guys will figure out how to make money of it. Our telcos will figure out how to make money of it. There will be an ROI that comes. It's not the LLM game. That may be a game for us for different reasons, but it's a people's game. And it is an ROI game. India might just be one of the few jurisdictions where AI diffusion will happen at scale and there will be a return, right? Because I think the way we're building this is thoughtful, but that means that hotels, industries, enterprises are going to have to be AI first. Government has to be AI first, right? And it's not just about a smart general manager using Claude to address his morning meeting, etc. But I'll leave you with the thought is, you're going to have to become an AI first hotel group tomorrow, right? And you're going to have to keep up with that enterprise, because if you don't, you will see labor displacement. But if you do, you'll see augmentation. That's very clear. And the last point I'll just leave you with is Ashish said, Ashish talked about domestic resilience, etc. That's basically it. I think there's a massive movement government today to say is that you have a new tourism secretary who's fantastic. If he could redo digital, he can redo tourism. But one thing this has all taught us is that with all the fractions and fractures geopolitically, we're going to need a massive push on the domestic side to grow that resilience. So I think whatever Ashish said to ask you to do to help him in this process, you should do it, because that's our hedge. I'll stop there. I think I actually did 12 minutes before the bell went off.
Thank you. I think I'll just ask all of you just one question to amplify before we throw it open to the audience, whether now or at lunch. And starting with you, Rudra, I know that you've gone into disjointed points, but I want to focus you on tech to ask what many would be interested to know. As a result of this war, where would applications be most affected in tech? Would it be in crypto security and mythos? Would it be in robotics? Would it be in weapons? Would it be in nuclear? Off the top of your head, since you've been involved in technology, which are the two areas you think which will get the most impetus from the Iran war?
I have a different view. I actually think that we're overselling the impact of the Iran war on just about everything, including technology. a lot of the impact on different kinds of technologies happening despite the crisis both in Europe as well as in the Gulf. But the two, three things that have become very clear to us, and we can talk about drones, and there will be some takeaways on the military technology side. How do you do interception? How do you think about EMPs? How do you think about, but one of the key ones, and this is not so much an impact of the Iran war, it just happens to be at the same time of the Iran war, is cyber and agentic AI, right? And I should kind of say very clearly is that the production of Mythos as a model, highly capable model that is essentially designed for detecting vulnerabilities and patching the same, which it can possibly do in a couple of minutes, which would take 1 million humans to put together to code, right? That's what we're talking about, right? And that's real, it's happened. That's why they've gated Mythos to only 100 enterprises. In the US, our own finance minister said, give me access so that I can protect my banks. You will be saying, give me access so that I can protect my hotel group, right? That is possibly the largest consequence that we're dealing with, which we'll have to figure out.
Thank you. Would you like to, Akshay, tell us if petrodollars means anything anymore?
Is this working?
Yeah,
Okay.
just briefly. Yeah.
Yeah, I think this is conceptually, I think we need to get this idea about petrodollars right. And I think this is the right time to do it. Petrodollars started at a time when, after the oil shock in the 1970s, and Saudi Arabia and the Gulf had lots of dollars. And the United States cut a deal to say that, okay, you can park your dollars in United States Treasury. And so that allowed massive flow of funds that went from the Gulf to the United States. And of course, the last 50 years has shown how the United States has recycled and used the money that the Gulf has put in or invested in the US. But that story was over by 1990s or early 2000s. These days, there is some holding that the Gulf countries have in US Treasury, but most of the money that the Gulf puts in the United States or anywhere around the world is through equities. They don't have to just buy government bonds. They have so many other avenues to do it. So that old conception of petrodollars is gone, first of all. Second, a new concept has come up related to petro equities and petro cryptocurrency. I mean, they're using all kinds of other things that are at their disposal, not just investing in the US, but around the world. And in that second part, it also includes India. Abu Dhabi Investment Authority was an anchor investor in NIIF. And we still are coveting so many of the other Gulf sovereign wealth funds. I did mention that the Gulf GDP was 2.5 trillion collectively, but the collective sovereign wealth funds, assets under management for Gulf is 6 trillion. I mean, imagine, it's 3 times their size. That means they can deploy 3 times of that capital, and we want some part of that action. So that's number 2. And just on number 3, one of the fundamental reasons why the Gulf would put or get money, oil revenues, was because they were able to sell the oil in the market. Right now, their oil is stuck. They're not being able to generate those revenues, so there is no extra cash. So just to clarify this whole thing about petrodollars, I think we need to have a conceptual reset and a better understanding, because it's used quite frequently in the policy debates. But I think it requires a better understanding.
Okay, Tino, I'm not going to ask you about Pakistan.
Please do.
I'm not. What I want to ask you is, of all the various impacts for India, which is going to be the most significant? A decline of trust with the US, or reaching out to China, or anything else? There are a whole hierarchy of them. What are the 2 most major geopolitical impacts on India from this war?
All of the above. All of the above. No, quick word on Pakistan. Let's not get distracted. I wanted you to ask that because I think we need to think about a developed economy by 2047. That is the political objective. To do that, the country needs to open up. It needs to integrate geoeconomically through technology. We heard it from Rudra and Akshay. And again, look at your industry, for example. As Mr. Dhawan was mentioning, right? Open tourism industry. That means attracting global talent to the tourism industry. And you'll all know that it's not easy today to convince young hotel managers to opt to do their careers in India for safety issues, for image issues, for brand issues. You've had that experience. I think the hospitality industry needs to double down on that, which is again openness. Openness means getting people here to grow together and get that right. And geopolitically, then I think naturally things will follow. If you build your capabilities at home, If you open up your universities to foreign professors, impossible today. Public universities have foreign professors, right? The Chinese have opened up 20 years ago. They're public university foreign citizens to teach it. Those are the sources of power. Geopolitical partnerships will come and go. As Rudy mentioned, there's a discussion now about how close you should get to China or not, on what terms, in what sectors. But fundamentally, what matters is opening up the country here at home and foreign policy beginning at home in that sense.
Thank you. We've run clean out
We'll
of
leave
time.
it. We'll leave it open for a couple of quick questions.
Okay, if there's some compelling questions outside of the lunch hour, please go ahead.
Thank you so much. There are some of us who always tracked business on how money exchanges hands. So whenever money exchanges hands, hoteliers make money. So we follow the money, right? So what I want to ask the panel is, what are the spaces where money will exchange hands, and how can we track it, and how can we bring that investment back to India for hospitality?
Akshay, would you take a lead?
Sorry, I have my mic here. Your question sounded a lot more nefarious. So I don't know if you're expecting me to talk about the black market, or you're just asking for a question about how to attract foreign capital.
Both.
I don't have that much experience in black market. If I did, I would not be here. I'm telling you that. But listen, feeding off of what Rudra said, look at what's happening around the world where the capital is moving. Again, let me just set a few things, right? Gross FDI inflows in India last year, 80 billion. That's gross. Net is 1 billion. $140 billion in remittances. What's more important? But that does not mean that it's not either or. We need remittances. We need FDI to be at 100 billion. We need our foreign institutional investment coming into our capital markets. Last year, foreign institutional investors from our capital markets, stock markets and debt markets pulled out close to $20 billion. This year again, already it's crossed $15 billion. We can't let that happen. But where is that money going? I think that's your question. A lot of it is going back to the United States. A $30+ trillion economy is growing at 2%. That's huge. Whether it's for AI or other reasons, I mean, they also have concerns about jobless growth, but that's huge. Look at Korea, 900% return on the stock market. I mean, we are competing with Vietnam and so many others. So we are in a very competitive environment, and there is I'm not an investment banker, but certainly there are a few buckets, and I would put sovereign wealth funds in one of those buckets where it's patient capital, and it depends a lot on the G2G relationship, not just what the financial markets do. So, which is why Gulf becomes important for us. But also, I mean, Indonesia has a sovereign wealth fund. Did you know that Indonesian sovereign wealth fund is in the top 5 sovereign wealth funds in the world? Exactly. So I think, I'm trying to put, the Gulf in perspective. And because you asked, and there was this element of, I don't know what it was. I'm trying to put my finger on your, but on the Forex market, because you said about Forex and the hotels deal with a lot of Forex, right? Guess which is the country which is the largest dealer of foreign exchange in the world? It's London. I mean, we have to keep perspective of where the power is, where are these transactions taking place? So UAE has Dubai, which is a great financial center. It is a very important financial center for us. But if 85% of foreign exchange transactions taking place in London, we need to keep our eye on the ball, right? We have Bombay Stock Exchange and National Stock Exchange, $5 trillion each. NYSE and NASDAQ are 40 trillion each. So, we need to keep an eye on the ball. The US, Japan, Germany, Korea, these are the top 5 countries for trade, for venture capital funding, for institutional investments and so on. We can talk a little bit more about that. I don't know if I answered your question, but okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Anil, thank you for putting in a great panel, and to all of you, thank you for giving such a balanced set of views. And this actually is for you, Anil, and you and I have discussed it before. Why don't you, gentlemen, and I'm sure there are others too, take some sessions for some of the retired IFS ambassadors and foreign secretaries, as well as some journalists who were exceptional in how they reported international relations, because they yell on an alternative view, which actually creates negativism and a lot of fear factor. When what you're saying is the right thoughts that they should be translating into fact, instead of giving the rears either purely for personal hatred reasons or maybe an involvement in the political reasons. Like just like your view on it. For you, Anu.
You know, human nature is a tricky thing. And it gets even trickier as people get old. So I think I'll leave it at that. I think you can't really stop a body of professionals from developing certain community views as they go along. But you're right. I have found more negativity than positivity, not about India, but generally about the world at large in days of the internet. And it's important for all of us, perhaps this is my view, you may have some others, that the world has been there for 4.6 billion years, this planet, and it's got at least another 5 billion years before the sun blows up. And people will figure out things, including how to go to the stars. And I'm sure humanity, I'm positive in that front, figure out things like wars, economic downturns, resources. I'm a great optimist in that. So, yeah, sure.
I just think we need to, I mentioned it briefly, sir, but I think we need to separate the politics in public from the policy in the background. And we shouldn't confuse both. That's why I mean, silence is one way we can confuse with inaction. Voice and discourse, we shouldn't also confuse with action. And I'll tell you the biggest paradox. I work a lot on the neighborhood, very difficult relations, right? Bangladesh, for example, the last 2 years, I go to Kathmandu, I go to Colombo. You know, the same leaders, ministers, presidents, PMs that I meet that are in public often, in electoral campaigns, saying India out, India down, running on campaigns, you know, on animosity, identity issues, are the same ones that in the background, when they talk to me, say, listen, we know that our developmental growth, our ability, me as a leader of this country, to develop jobs for the people and to get re-elected, hinges first and foremostly on good economic relations with India. Sri Lanka, tourism industry, for example, right? Maldives, again, India out, but they know that they're going to rely on the big next door market. So I think let's not confuse that, and let's build those ties of interdependence that really speak volumes, right? Numbers of Indian tourists going there, trade with Bangladesh now. If you take out all the energy trade with Russia, you know, people don't know India trades more with Bangladesh than with Russia. Right? So I think there's a huge story to be told, particularly for the hospitality industry in this periphery and Indian Ocean region, where political stability is very important, and where, let me just end with one thing. How much do we know about these countries and these geographies? The Chinese invested for decades in universities, think tanks, government to know Africa, South Asia, Southeast Asia, so that their companies can have a smooth ride when they enter these economies. So let's invest more in that too, to know our neighbors and deliver those growth solutions to our neighbors.
Okay, Akshay, you want to say anything? Winding up.
I think I lost my train of thought, but there's one thought that came to mind, which is just on the vulnerabilities. I think that you know, we also have to get a better understanding of how our economy is growing. So if you look at the latest reports, you know, we've crossed $850 billion in exports. No easy feat. And as soon as you say this to somebody who says, oh, petroleum and gems and jewelry, and most of the growth has come from non-petroleum, non-gems. In fact, non-petroleum, non-gems now make up to 75% of our exports. Second, services exports have also crossed $400 billion. In fact, services exports and merchandise exports have come at par, about $400, $420, $450 billion each. That's huge. The surplus that we are getting from our services exports is making up from the deficit that we have from our goods export, helping us balance this. We can plow in a little bit of our money here. Now, but if we pull out capital, where did the capital leave? The capital that came into foreign institutional investment. They pulled out from financial services and IT. So it's very important that, you know, as that money that for both foreign direct investment and for institutional investments, we need money to come into our
Okay.
services and manufacturing.
Thank
So
you.
this, sorry, I mean, I know you want me to wrap up. So I think just a better understanding of our composition, I think, is helpful.
Thank you. Join me in giving them a hand. I think they got.
Thank you.
For your picture, please. Yes. We're missing one of the panelists. Well, thank you so much. For a picture, if you can get together, that'll be lovely. Thank you. I think I started out, I'm just going to take 1 minute of your time, please. Yeah. I started out by saying we are at a perplexing cusp where the old world is dying and the new world is struggling to be born. And surely, geography sure holds the key to the future of a nation. So now, ladies and gentlemen, much anticipated